Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Last I checked, 19,358 people were playing Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition on Steam. There were 354 ranked games going on, and let's overestimate and say the average game has 6 players in it. That's a little over 2,000 people playing ranked at the moment. 41 of the last 100 games launched were ranked, so quick math puts us at around 5,200 people currently playing. We'll throw in the 260 people waiting in the unranked lobby, and we'll be really generous and say there's another 1,000 people in the ranked queue. Put it all together and we're still only accounting for at most a third of the total people playing the game right now. So where are the other 2/3 of the players? Obviously, if not multiplayer, then single player, either playing the campaigns or matches against the AI. A lot of those people probably also play online sometimes, but I suspect a good chunk of the player base doesn't for one reason or another, and those people are going to be the focus for this video. If you're one of those people but happy just sticking with single player, then that's awesome. But for anyone on the fence, I'll be giving my thoughts about when you're ready to play online and what I think would be helpful to know beforehand. We have to be realistic that Age of Empires 2 has a somewhat intimidating online scene. The game is over 20 years old, and it's scary to queue up for the first time to play with people who have been playing it the majority of their lives. If nothing else though, the biggest thing I want to convey here is that no matter what skill level you are, there's systems in place to allow you to find a fun, evenly matched game. Online play is not just for the ultra competitive. This is all kind of vague though. Maybe you do want a checklist of foundational skills so you know you're going to hit the ground running. So let's start with some specific skills that are really going to help. The first is a basic Dark Age build order, or at least a plan. On the one hand, it always feels like a blessing when people share good build orders in the community, but in a way, it's also a bit of a curse, raising the bar for entry for new players. If you have access to build orders, tips, and tricks, then so do your opponents. The truth is, the majority of online players are following some sort of plan in Dark Age, and unfortunately that means you have to learn at least some basics if you want to keep up. At the same time, it doesn't mean you need hours of dedicated practice though. Personally, I've done a guide for the first 15 villagers as one example, but you can find tutorial videos, written build orders, or even an interactive guide on the mod workshop. You don't need to execute them perfectly, but establishing a solid plan for at least the first 15 villagers is going to help you get off on the right foot. I also think it's important to go online with a main civilization, or possibly two that are your go-tos. There are various schools of thought about what the best civilization to learn first is, but ultimately it's not going to make a huge difference. I think the number one benchmark people want to know though is what level of AI should you be able to beat before going online. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but if you can beat the extreme AI without towers, I'd say you're definitely good enough. Even beating the current moderate AI puts you ahead of a decent chunk of the online community. I think advanced times are another benchmark that you can use, and being able to reach feudal age by 13 minutes at the latest if you're making feudal military units, or having a fast castle time under 18 minutes are both decent benchmarks. Either of those times, if you're on Arabia with low resources, suggests to me that your economy is fairly solid and you know the fundamentals. A heads up though is that while playing against the AI is good practice, in some ways it's quite different to online. At a certain point, you can start to learn how to just exploit the AI rather than learn how to play better. There's nothing against an AI that replicates being tower rushed, for example, and real players tend to be a lot smarter about raiding and avoiding things like castles and towers. And finally, knowing the basic unit counters is pretty important. Again, I have a video going through the basic counters to every unit type, though even the in-game tech tree can give some good pointers about that if you have a look. Developing a sense of how to counter units is especially important against real players who anticipate and adapt to what you're making. So those are some ideas of things to work toward for your own play, and if you can consistently beat the moderate AI, you're probably doing a lot of these things right, and have the skills to compete. That said, playing online in team games brings a whole new aspect. Now let's talk about those skills that you can't get from single player, and what players online generally expect from one another. Again, I hope it doesn't come across as intimidating or gatekeeping, but there are certain conventions or a meta that people will assume you know from the start of the game. I don't want to make things too long and overwhelming, and you will pick up a lot of these quite quickly if you play online, but the big one to know is that in a 3 vs 3 or 4 vs 4, the players on the sides are the flanks, and the player or players in between are the pocket. As a general expectation, pocket players go for knights, and flank players go for archers, and upgrade them later to crossbows. The two units cover each other's weaknesses, and the extra mobility for the pocket player is especially nice, as their role is to defend and support their flank. Now, of course, there are exceptions here, and flank players can go for scouts or men-at-arms if it makes more sense for their civilization. You don't always have to stick to the meta script, but just be aware that people will expect this by default. Contrast that with a 2 vs 2, where you don't have a flank or pocket player, and in that case, usually instead one player goes for cavalry and the other for archers. Again, of course, you don't have to follow that convention, but by default, a lot of people are going to assume that that's what you'll do. You may also see some abbreviations in chat like FC for Fast Castle, TC for Town Center, and GB for Go Back, or just back, which means you're taking a bad fight and you need to back up and regroup. There's a bit of lingo in AoE2, but it's one of those things that you'll mostly pick up as you go. One that might not be totally intuitive is if they say X, what they mean is they want you to flare a location on the map. Flaring happens a lot online in both the early and late game to show people what you're talking about. It's also very common to flare the enemy locations as you find them in Dark Age. If you find a player's town, just flare that location and let your team know the player's color, so your team can get a sense of where the enemy civilizations are on the map. In this game, for example, I was the pocket, and around 9 minutes my flank flared Red's town center, telling me where the Aztec player was. Since the middle number of each team is the pocket player, that tells me yellow is the pocket and the other flank is Portuguese. As the pocket player with the role of supporting my two flanks, that's useful information for me in deciding my strategy. Also, somewhat related to this, I want to talk briefly about online etiquette. I mentioned it already, but some communication and checking in with your team about your strategy is generally polite. Once you have your economy running, just letting your team know what strategy you're going for in even just a couple of words goes a long way. If you know you're making knights, just say I'm FC Knights. It's quick and easy and helps the team coordinate, especially if they're players you haven't played with before. Also, at the end of the game, just give a quick GG or good game before you resign. In the same vein, it's good to have a chat with your team before resigning. It's considered pretty bad manners to just resign out of nowhere in the middle of a game or at the first sign of being raided. Especially if you're new to online, just try sticking it out for a bit. Just because you lose a couple of villagers to scouts doesn't mean the game's automatically over. It's good to practice defending under pressure and having a game not go perfectly. Even if you're at a point that you don't think you can come back and win your side, just give your team a heads up before resigning. They might even know something about the situation that you didn't notice, like that they're winning on the other side of the map, or they can send some units and resources to help you out. Everybody remembers what it was like when they started playing online, and they're generally really happy to try to help you out. Another thing I want to mention is pausing etiquette. You can pause with F3, but anyone in the game, including your opponents, can also unpause by pressing F3. Most players will accommodate that if it's brief, but check in before you unpause and make sure they're ready to go again. Generally though, pausing for more than 30 seconds is very frowned upon online, so it helps to be polite and appreciative of everyone's patience. So now we've covered things in single player you can do to prepare, team game meta, and etiquette. You're all set to go and excited to play online. Great, you're gonna love it. So where do you start? Well, depending on how nervous you are to play online, a really great way to jump in can be surprisingly enough against the AI. If you navigate to multiplayer and then custom game, you can often find people hosting them, usually 4 vs 4 against extreme difficulty, but sometimes lower levels as well. You can also host your own game if you like, and the AI ones tend to fill up pretty quickly. It's a great way to dip your toe in and get a taste of the coordination and camaraderie of playing online, but in a bit less competitive setting, and with some control over the skill level you're up against. There do tend to be lots of other games in the unranked lobby, but be a little careful assuming that noob in the title means someone brand new to playing online. Personally, I don't know how you differentiate between intermediate, noob, semi-noob, and ultra-noob in a lobby, and to be honest, you can have pretty unbalanced games letting people self-assess their skill level like this. I think of this lobby more for custom scenarios, AI games, or if you have a bunch of people and you all want to play together. All of this is unranked, so there's no pressure, but it also means it's hard to get balanced games. The next step is the quick play option. You can invite Steam friends to join you, ban maps that you don't like, and it'll try to matchmake based on your previous games. It does secretly track your rating for unranked games, and that's why I say it's the next step above just hunting in the lobby, but you can still get some very one-sided matches. If you're really ready for the show, you can go to ranked. Ratings can be stressful because it feels like everything counts, but ultimately what it's trying to do by giving you a rating is match you up with opponents you have a 50% chance to beat. If you start playing ranked and lose a lot of your first games, on one level, it's discouraging. But on the other hand, the result is you'll start getting more fair matches, where you and your opponent each have a 50% chance to win. As you improve and gain experience, your odds of winning against the competition will go above 50% and you'll move up. It's that simple. The best argument for playing rated is that while it can take a while for the system to find your rating, in the long run, you'll consistently get the most balanced games. To give a general sense of what each rating means in Definitive Edition, the average 1 vs 1 rating is 1000, which is comparable to the extreme AI. It's not a perfect comparison because the AI is weak to early aggression, maybe comparable to a 900 rated player, but it improves a lot in the late game and can feel as strong as up to 1100 if you ignore its quirks. Obviously, I'm just ballparking, but that's what I've found based on my experience. Personally, I'd love to see the results of the extreme AI playing on the ladder and see where it ends up. Team games, on the other hand, have their own rating with an average of about 1450, which seems to be slowly creeping up over time due to a mistake in how the rating system was implemented. It's much less consistent than the 1 vs 1 rating, though the two are correlated to some extent. So hopefully that gives a useful overview if you're weighing jumping into online play. It's not necessarily for everyone, but there's something communal about team games in particular that I think adds a lot to the experience. 1 vs 1 games are also where you can take the competitive side of things to the next level, if that's what you enjoy about the game. It is a cliche, but the best mindset, I think, is to just try to have fun with it. It's a great community with everything from 20-year-old veterans to people who just picked the game up last week. It tends to be a bit more mature and wholesome community as well, so I definitely encourage everyone to give online a try. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to Jean-Paul, Brock, James, Daniel, Noah, Brian, Connor, Zach, and Samantha, as well as everyone else on Patreon for the huge support of what I do. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.